Good morning. Can you hear in the back? Let's see, I guess a better question is there anyone who can't hear? Briefly, our schedule this morning includes approximately 45 minutes of shamata or calm abiding practice with some brief instructions. I like to say some brief instructions that you have never heard before. I like to say it whether it's true or not. And then we'll have a break of 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll come back and have an open conversation meant to be an opportunity for you to clarify your understanding of the practice that we're engaging in this morning. But beyond that, clarification of the entire path, whatever you would like to raise, it's an opportunity to do that. So first of all, a couple of important points that we often raise. But generally speaking, we do not pursue those points deep enough, well enough, regularly enough because we have the deep assumption, which in one way is completely correct, that we already understand it. So in particular, I'm talking about the practice of turning our minds to refuge in the Buddha, which you can think of as the progenitor of the entire tradition. In other words, that person who delivered those teachings that became codified and into a tradition of Buddhism that we now practice. So refuge in that person can feel a bit meaningless, or maybe at best quaint. Given that I know that we often fall into that mode of thinking, it's important to occasionally remind ourselves why we go for refuge, and why we go for refuge to the Buddha, and why we go for refuge to the Sangha, or the community of practitioners. That would be us. Why we go for refuge to the teachings. Primarily, we turn our minds to refuge in the Buddha as an alternative to our usual refuge that we take, have been taking for many decades, which would be refuge in our sense of self and our attachment to it, refuge in our friends, which is not really anything wrong with that, refuge in our careers, refuge in our country, refuge, you can just make the list yourself. Mostly, when we go for refuge, even without any understanding, we do have a sense of the things which are good to go for refuge in. But often we are missing the single most important and valuable source of refuge, which is our awakened mind. So we will ask the question, why do we go for refuge to the awakened mind? Before we have accomplished the awakened mind. And one very nice answer to that is that we already are in full possession of the awakened mind. Not recognizing that fundamental truth, it's difficult to go for refuge. In the awakened mind, when we have not yet experienced it knowingly. So the Buddha has said we experience the awakened mind all day long and all night long. But merely understanding that in a conceptual affirmation way, clearly it doesn't get the job done. Yet it's not a complete failure, otherwise no one would be here. So when we go for refuge to the Buddha, we are meant to have an experience. So maybe we just raise the aspiration, I would like to go for refuge to the Buddha, but I don't actually know what that means. But let's run a short experiment. You want to go for refuge. I mean, at least we have this end no harm done in going for refuge, it appears. So that's really the minimum. You're sitting here, okay, no harm done. Which actually is not nothing, because we are routinely in a place of going for refuge in our attachments, going for refuge in our judgments about others, judgments about ourselves. So those are really harmful things. So even if we have no idea what refuge is, at least it's a few minutes of doing something that is harmless. But of course, we want more than that. Refuge in the Buddha we can think of as a view. So in our tradition of Buddhism, as we practice it in this lineage and in really most of the lineages that we're familiar with, holding the appropriate view when we practice any meditation is critical. It's not critical in the sense that it's harmful. Again, if you don't hold the view, it's just kind of like when you were very young and maybe your father let you sit in the car behind the wheel. I personally remember sitting behind the wheel and thinking that was very cool. The car didn't go anywhere. So I imagined that it was going places and I would go, and imagine it was moving and I would turn the wheel. At some point we get tired of that. How come when I'm behind the wheel, the car doesn't go anywhere? So in this case, the antidote to the car which doesn't go anywhere, of many antidotes really, we are advised to hold a view. In this case, we hold the view, for starters, that turning our minds to refuge is to turn our minds in the direction of what is already there. That is to say, we are each fully endowed with the awakened mind of the Buddha. Now, this is not some kind of spooky thing that we are endowed with the awakened mind of the Buddha. It's really simple. Captured by that story, one of my favorite, very short stories, of, in ancient times, a man approaching the Buddha in the street and asking him, honestly, what is different between you and me? And the Buddha answered, so it is said, no difference. Exactly the same. If there is a difference, it is not a difference in the awakened mind. It is a difference in whether or not you have recognized it. And so the Buddha is said to have said, perhaps the difference is, I recognize that awakened mind and you do not. But you are not any less endowed with the awakened mind than I am. So the view that we need to hold to nurture our sense of moving in the direction of recognizing it is, first of all, to just hold the view that you are endowed with it. And you don't need to even believe that you are endowed with it. In fact, personally, I think belief is a little bit of an obstacle. Belief tends to solidify things. Now I know what the truth is. But knowing what the truth is conceptually is kind of like an aluminum nickel. It isn't really worth much. But like on a sunny day when you put glasses on to shield your eyes from the glare, you are not fooled into thinking that because things are darker, the sun has gone down. You understand that the glasses change things. They don't really change the sun or the brightness of the light, but they change your experience of that. And so in the same way, when we talk about view, we really should talk about it much more than we do. We hold views as a matter of practical support for the meditation that we're engaging in. So in this case, we want to turn our minds to refuge in the Buddha. And in order for that to be effective, we have to have this experience of turning our minds to refuge in the Buddha. Merely having a conceptual idea that just reciting a few words is going to make that happen. If that worked, we would all be enlightened already, since we have said those words so many times. So when we hold a view, in this case, and we'll just work on this one for a few more moments, I turn my mind to refuge in the Buddha, holding the view, holding the attitude, holding the assumption that actually I am fully endowed with the awakened mind. The only thing standing between my understanding of that conceptually is to turn the experience on and to recognize that awakened mind. No necessity for complication. No matter what practice we engage in, that's what it all comes down to. So you can engage in enormously complex practices, which quite a few people in this room have done. It can be very helpful or not. But no matter what, it's always about the experience that comes from holding the view that I am fully endowed with the awakened mind. The issue is not whether I have that or not. It is about whether I recognize it or not. And that is it. It all comes down to that. So if we can not lose track of that, we can continually bring ourselves back to the place where we need to be. The first most important means for recognizing the nature of mind is to acknowledge and hold the view that I am fully endowed with it already. When we say, I am fully endowed with the awakened mind, if we allow ourselves to actually, for the moment, nurture a sense of confidence that it is there, even if the backdrop is you're faking it. But nowhere in our tradition do we say that you need to fake it, that it is there, and that no matter who you are or who you have been or will be, you are fully endowed with it. It is only about recognizing what you already have. So when we turn our minds to refuge, hold the view. I turn my mind from all of my worldly concerns, my attachments, my aversions, my hopes, my disappointments, my joy, my kindness, my friends, all these things. Turning my mind from all of those things to refuge in the Buddha is turning our minds to refuge in our own awakened nature. When we do that, each of us will have a different experience because we're different people. We have different pasts. Even if you do this every day and go for refuge, every day you do it, it's very important to recognize that going for refuge today, you have never done before. Even if you recite it 100 times and hold the view that I'm going for refuge in the Buddha, again, every recitation is unique. Isn't that obvious? Should be obvious. But it's obvious mostly from a conceptual perspective. So once again, we are missing the experience. We must have the experience. And the experience every time, really, needs to be absolutely fresh, never having occurred before, nor will it ever occur again. This is kind of the mental framework within which we turn our minds to refuge in a way which is fresh and new every time. So we'll start by going for refuge together and reciting the liturgy 3 times.
Until the summit of enlightenment is reached, I and all beings go for refuge to the sources of true refuge. I will now practice the absorption of calm abiding in order to release all beings from their particular suffering and establish them in lasting peace and happiness. Until the summit of enlightenment is reached, I and all beings go for refuge to the sources of true refuge. I will now practice the absorption of calm abiding in order to release all beings from their particular suffering and establish them in lasting peace and happiness. until the summit of enlightenment is reached. I and all beings go for refuge to the sources of true refuge. I will now practice the absorption of calm abiding in order to release all beings from their particular suffering and establish them in lasting peace and happiness.
The meditation we call calm abiding relies mostly on the ability to relax. It does not rely at all upon having a mind which is still. Definitely does not rely on a mind which is empty. Everyone here who is still alive can vouch that they have never found an empty mind, nor will that ever happen. But to be able to relax with the mind, whatever is going on there, whether we are feeling at peace, filled with angst, filled with loving kindness or hatred, makes no difference. The important piece is to develop the ability to place our awareness on the experience that occurs in the mind continuously, without effort, though there may be a little effort in the very beginning. We bring our awareness to the experience that we're having in this moment, because there is no other moment. And we rest our awareness there on whatever the experience is. That is the analogous piece to the dark glasses in the sun. Bringing our awareness to our experience, whatever it is. If the experience is that we wish we had another experience, that's just another place to rest the awareness. If your mind is filled with joy or angst or judgment, the view is it's just another experience. It's important not to be fooled by the awakened mind. Fooled in the sense of thinking that an awakened mind is a still mind. We may find our mind is still from time to time, but mostly we will say, kind of rare. My guess is there is no one here who has not tried to still their mind. Kind of like talking a mad elephant into being still. So we can say many things about the stillness. We can talk about the emptiness of experience, which is to say we recognize the lack of reality in our angst or in our judgments or in our internal conversations. But every one of them is an experience. And since we're meditators, a sense of curiosity about the mind is more important than what we witness there. More important than being able to sit still is to bring your curiosity to all of the experiences that are continuously unfolding in the mind. We say the content of the mind arises continuously, unimpeded, never stops. Has been doing that since time way before we were born. Actually, beginningless. All the experiences that we feel have no beginning, nor do they have an end. And if you've been watching during your life so far, you will notice so far that appears to be the case. So now what we want to do is, we want to bring our awareness to whatever experience we're having. And to recognize that experience, not its name, not its size or shape or its duration, just to recognize the experience. I could say, well, I'm feeling pretty good today. But now we've skipped what we wanted to do. We want to bring our awareness to that experience. And that experience will not last long. So we don't have too much time to accomplish this. Experiences generally arise and disappear within moments. They're like bubbles on the surface of water. So our objective is to place our awareness on the experiences as they unfold. Not to control the experiences, not to judge the experiences. Not to be happy with the experiences, but also not to be unhappy with the experiences. We want our awareness to rest on our experience, because the experiences are what we continuously have. So if we are to become intimate with ourselves in the context of our meditation, we must develop the skill of being able to rest our awareness on the experiences as they unfold. That's a very profound way of practicing shamata, calm abiding. You may not be calm or have a calm experience of the mind, but you must be able to relax and rest your awareness on the experiences. And when you find that the mind has gone off, which will happen, every second, regularly, you just bring your awareness back to whatever the experience is at that time. Don't put your mind back on the experience that was there before. It's gone. And you will never see it again. That's a view to hold. Hold the view that your experience that you just had, you will never have again. No matter how pleasant or unpleasant it was, it's just clear you'll never have it again. So Our objective is not to stabilize the experience. That's a hoax. Somebody we all know would probably, if they had the wherewithal, would say fake news. But not to worry, there'll be more right behind it. So try this. Settle into your place physically. It really doesn't matter. You could be sitting, standing, lying on your back. It doesn't matter. Really, fundamentally. You may find it very helpful to sit cross-legged in meditation. You may not find it that way. Or more likely, you may find it very helpful today and not helpful tomorrow. We are concerned about this moment and the experience that's arising and our mind settling into the place of just having the experience, period. That's it. It's up to you now.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
So we'll take a little break, get a chance to get up and stretch, and there's 4 or 5 restrooms in this building, so you can take care of that, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes and have our open conversation.
Announcements?
Oh, you have an announcement?
Incredible show that will be October 27th. So there's a stack of them. Please take a stack and hand them out to your friends and family and anyone else, strangers.
In the bookstore, we have our new calendars. We have more than a dozen different varieties. It's a big fundraiser for us. And we also now have Bokar Rinpoche's Chenrezig Lord of Love, which has been unavailable for such a long time. We have reproduced it for $5.